much for coming this afternoon. I'm really glad to see you all because this is such a really important topic for us to discuss. My name is Diane Cowan and I am a librarian. I currently work at the Capitola Branch Library. So I'm just going to give you, before we dive into the panel, just kind of a quick overview of sort of the banned book and challenge landscape that's going on. Sure. That's going on right now. So there is a difference between challenge and ban. A challenge is just when you're attempting to remove or restrict access to the materials. And a ban is when you actually succeed and are unlock it. We'll have to edit the video. So a ban is when you've actually removed those materials. And it's also a difference between the legitimate activity of wanting a book moved to a different area, maybe for a different, you think it's more adult, or I don't want my child to read it. So, those are kind of legitimate challenges. And the less legitimate, where it's, I don't want anybody to have access to that book. So 2022 set a record for the most bans and challenges since ALA, the American Library Association, began collecting that data. And this year is set to break that record. Between January 1st and August 31st, there were 695 attempts to censor library materials. And the documented challenges were to 1,915 titles. The number of unique titles challenged has increased by 20% from the same reporting period in 2022. And 2022's numbers were more than 20% higher than the previous year. So this is just kind of a graphic of what types of things get challenged. And yeah, all the blue, it usually is books, graphic novels, that kind of stuff. But there's a few things like displays and exhibits that we have in all of our libraries, programs and meeting rooms, the types of meetings we have here, and films. So yeah, what's changed all of a sudden? So the biggest change is that the challenges are now coming from these organized censorship groups. And the vast majority of these challenges have to do with voices and stories by and about people of color, and even more so LGBTQ+ characters, authors, and themes. So these organized groups are getting really more targeted with multiple titles at once, targeting multiple jurisdictions at once. This is really different from prior to 2021, when, it was really just like a concerned parent over a particular title, or, something similar to that. Before 2020, most challenges came from a single parent. And now 90% of challenges are coming from multiple titles, like I mentioned. And the biggest difference is that these censors don't want anyone to read the books. This is it feels like a coordinated attempt to erase the identities of people of color and LGBTQ+ folks and to rewrite history. So, here's kind of a breakdown of historically who are the folks that challenge books. And but now we have 11 individuals challenging hundreds of titles at once in multiple states and jurisdictions. 11 people. That's reported in the New York Times and listed in the resource guides that we have up here. The book banning movement frames itself as being about parental rights, but in fact it constitutes a small number of parents restricting the rights of a large number of people. And these organized censors are using the term pornography to refer to anything related to the LGBTQ+ community or sex education of any kind. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but here's the, kind of going through the top 10 most challenged in the previous year, and it also says why it was challenged, and you can see, equity content, LGBTQIA content, that is just repeated over and over again, and in all of these. So, a lot of thought in school and public libraries goes into every single book in our collection. And all libraries have a formal process to reconsider the placement of books in their collection. So we have a selection process. I'm not going to read the slide, but we also have a collection development plan and a policy and a way that people can ask us to reconsider either the placement or whatever of a book in our collection as well. And this here is the Library Bill of Rights, which is really important, and I'm just going to read the underlined ones. Libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. Libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment, and libraries should cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. So I just want to leave you with kind of the answer to what the cumulative impact of banning books is. And it's the reason that libraries work so hard to fight censorship and protect intellectual freedom, because it limits the exchange of ideas, it restricts diversity, access to information and ideas, and it is being used to whitewash history. And that is it for me. And now I'd like to introduce you all to our panel. We are so pleased and lucky to have our moderator, Wallace Bain of local fame, local author, reporter. I will let you introduce yourself because your list is long. And I'd like to welcome Farah Saba, Superintendent of the County Office of Education. And Zach, I don't know your last name. Zach Keith works at the Diversity Center. And Scarlett Her is a high school student at Harbor High. Shannon Tracy is a librarian teacher at Harbor High. And Cynthia Lewis is the head of EDI at
Associate Dean of Equity, Inclusion, Diversity, and Justice, but also a professor in the Education Department. Since my chair is here, I want to make sure I say that.
Yes. So, and I'm sorry for that terrible introduction, but I'm thinking you all will do a much better job introducing yourselves, and I am at this point going to let Wallace take over.
Thank you, Diane. My name is Wallace Bay. I'm a local writer, journalist. Have been covering Santa Cruz County, the cultural part of it anyway, for 30 plus years. Boy, that sounds hard. But started just right across the street here. In the days before the internet, we used to have to sit there at our desk, and when we had a question, this sounds like horse and buggy days, but when we had a question, we'd have to, well, let's go across the street to the library and look up the, so I've been around a long time. Just a quick story before we introduce the panel here. I wrote about this event as just a small little advance for Lookout, where I work now, and I was kind of shocked. I got a couple of, I guess you'd call, spitballs from the back of the room from people who are upset that I was even writing about it. So obviously this is still a hot topic among a lot of people. So that I think speaks to its importance. And so I think what we want to do, Diane, is have each of the panelists make a statement, or is that what we're doing?
It's on your sheet right there.
Okay.
Yeah, we would definitely like to hear why this topic is important to each of you.
Well, let's start with Ferris.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Does my voice carry to the back?
Yes.
Yes. So I work for the County Office of Education, as you heard, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about why this is important to me. It's definitely something. The idea of banning books is something that that really frightens a lot of us in education. It's of great concern to us. But for me, my why is I grew up in Iraq, and under a totalitarian regime under Saddam Hussein. In fact, when I was born was when he came to power in Iraq. And I was a child, when we left, and I was about 10 years old, but when it came to how a totalitarian regime controls information and represses people, the idea of limiting access to content and limiting access to information is a fundamental part of control. And when I think about what it represents for people to try to limit access to information, it reminds me it resonates with me as part of a totalitarian approach to controlling information and repressing people. Another part of my experience was coming here to the United States as a boy at the age of 10. And, you heard Cynthia mention that her department is equity, diversity, inclusion. In schools also, we use those concepts and adhere to them, and they're fundamental to what we believe in. And many school districts are starting to add belonging to that list. Sometimes justice, but belonging, I think Cynthia mentioned justice was added to there, so we're kind of expanding it. And this idea of belonging is so important, and it was so important for me as a young immigrant child who didn't speak English very well and felt very out of place. I came from a Muslim family. I felt like I didn't belong here. And the idea of having positive relationships with adults, the idea of having representation of myself was so important to me to be able to feel like, to be able to claim a space for myself here. And when I think about what representation means for our students and the need for creating spaces where they feel that they belong and having representation so that they walk into their libraries, when they listen to their teachers speak, when they're in their hallways, when they are connecting with adults and students, this idea of representation is so important. And so the idea that that group of people are wanting to limit that representation for political reasons is important to me. And I want to be a part of doing everything I can to support belonging and making sure that we're not limiting that representation and that voice for our students. and that's my why.
Hi everyone, my name is Zach Keith. My pronouns are they, them. I have a couple different kind of positions that I think I enter the space with. I'm a graduate student at the University of Santa Cruz. Specifically, I am pursuing my PhD in developmental psychology. I work with LGBTQ+ youth from our local community, and I interview them on how their digital experiences, so specifically using social media, inform their identity development. I also have a focused interest on how family systems, their relationship and attachment to their family informs the strategies they use online, as well as how their cultural context might impact the various unique strategies that they create for that. I'm also a program facilitator at the Diversity Center. I've been working with them for the past few months, specifically working with our gender diverse and trans youth and providing spaces and skills for sustainable identity development. And lastly, I'm a local drag artist that works with my community in various capacities, including with youth as a local drag artist. And my why, to give a little background, I'm from rural Appalachia, Virginia. And I found that saying rural usually doesn't cover about how isolated I was. The town that I spent the most of my childhood developing under was a town with a population of about 270 people. I grew up more near a coal mine than I did a gas station. So didn't have access to the internet until about 8th grade. And so I think it was no surprise that my experiences developing my queer identity, understanding that a community even existed out there, let alone how I fit into that equation, was really limited and isolated. And so I was able to finally start getting access to information and resources. However, at that phase of my experience, it was like a wealth of information that was out there, but I had no idea how to navigate it or how to do so safely and in a healthy way. And then I went to my undergraduate experience where I finally took a human sexuality class, and suddenly everything opened up and there were so many more options, and I felt more confident in my identity than I had for almost my entire development at that point. I got my degrees in psychology, sociology, and criminology because I was really intent on understanding how we as a collective, as society, want to understand how, from the individual of how we all process in our own individualistic context, to how structurally and systemically we exist and either uphold or disrupt the ways in which these oppressive mechanisms enter our space. And so when I think about banned books, I really think about it from all those different perspectives. I think about it as an artist, as an activist, as a scholar, and as a person who I wish that I had had the access to some of these books when I was younger. I think I would have had a very different experience growing up. And in fact, that those are being challenged and restricted for our youth now is terrifying to me because I know what that lack of access did for me, and I would never wish that on our youth. So that's why I'm here today to talk about it.
Hi, I'm Scarlett, she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior at Harbor High School. I'm also the treasurer of both our QSA and our kind of book club thing. And I'm someone who has had the amazing privilege of being able to find myself and discover my identity and express myself through my reading and through things I learned through, just books and TV shows and movies and other people around me. And the idea that people younger than me, kids, even my underclassmen, the idea that they're gonna have such a hard time being able to find and express themselves breaks my heart. I mean, for my school QSA, every semester I give presentations to our health class about queer health. And the lack of knowledge that these kids only a few years younger than me, it's so heartbreaking. And the fact that people around this country that try to hide and censor this knowledge about people and identities and everything that is essential for a child and a teenager to learn, it's unfathomable to my brain. The idea that people want to hide things, want to hide knowledge. I'm someone who has spent so long trying to learn, trying to discover. And as a teenager, as a student, that's just, again, heartbreaking. And I want to work hard. I want to help people. I want to educate people in what I was able to learn. and help them find their identities through the same way that I was.
Hi, I'm Shannon Tracy, and I've been fortunate to be the librarian at Harbor High since 2012. I have the privilege of working with students like Scarlett, 1,000, give or take, depending on the year. Just a little promo, as a teacher librarian, I'm required by the state of California to have both a teaching credential and a librarian credential. I also have my master's in library science. Santa Cruz is one of the few counties in the state that still has credentialed teacher librarians, one for every school site. It's very unusual, unfortunately, in our city, and Scarlett and my own 2 children were the beneficiaries of that, attending Santa Cruz City Schools and graduating from them in the past few years. So I love my job. It's the best job in the world. I had always been interested in education. I'm a 3rd generation teacher. I've always been a reader, so this job is just a perfect blend of all those things. There's never a quiet moment in the library at Harbor High. So at the high school, I serve the school community, so it's a very focused kind of librarianship. I work with the teachers and the administrators to build a library that supports our curriculum as well as our students and our student community. I work with teenagers who are searching for their identities and trying to figure out who they are, and we try to provide a breadth of different materials to appeal to them in different ways. And I also serve the students by creating a safe space. I know many people will recount that the library was the place they felt safe in school, and I think we have that at Harbor. It's a little raucous. We have Uno games going every break and lunch that get really loud, but we do have quiet places you can read, and we do have the ability to find a book, whether you want to work one-on-one with one of the library staff. We can help you in a very personal way that I think is lost in a lot of interchanges we have today as Americans, and it's a very one-on-one sort of, what do you like to read, what movie did you like, which I think is not common anymore. And we also have privacy, where students can use our online database to search for a title without anyone knowing. So as a librarian, I advocate for access. I believe it's important to defend the rights of all people, including students, to have intellectual freedom. Librarians have the incredibly important role in a democracy to provide equitable access to information. And I believe that efforts to ban books and other attacks on the ability of libraries to provide that access threaten to erode the flow of ideas and impinge our freedom. It is critical that we support libraries and protect the right to read, write, and access information. So thank you for inviting me to be on the panel.
Hi, thank you all, really. It's nice to be last and having heard what everybody else said. I'm Cynthia Lewis, as I said before, and I'm a professor in the education department. I'm a teacher educator, and I'm also an educational researcher, and I had been a teacher for a long time before that. And I have grave concerns about the harm that is done to young people when they do not see themselves in the curriculum, and when their histories, cultures, and communities are not discussed freely in classroom conversations, because it's not just the books that are banned, but the conversations as well. In fact, the Freedom to Learn organization, which is tracking censorship of all kinds across the country, has reported that over half the children in the nation have had their freedom to learn taken away from them through challenged and banned in books and censorship. This topic matters to me because students are being harmed by these practices of censorship, and teachers too, which I hope I have a chance to talk about as we talk through the questions. It's most especially students of color and LGBTQ+ students who are most harmed. The first instance of book bans in the United States began with the restriction of anti-slavery materials in the 19th century. What does that tell you? It should come as no surprise then that nationally, you do see different statistics on this, but something like 37% of banned books feature characters of color or any content that has something to do with racism. And I think I had last year's percentages on LGBTQ+ books, but it was 26% and rising. My emphasis is in English language arts classroom research, and I know from my own research and from that of others that students are more motivated to learn when their identities are recognized and included. There's research that proves this. We know from research at Stanford that students of color who have taken an ethnic studies course, in other words, a class that affirms the identities and histories of students of color, are more likely to graduate than those who do not. What research tells us is that it's important to have mirrors and windows in the curriculum, and some of you have heard this language probably before. That is, students must have opportunities to see themselves and see the lives and experiences and cultures of others. Without mirrors, students feel erased and somehow deficient, like what's wrong with me that I'm not here in this classroom, I'm not in this curriculum, I'm not in these books. Without opportunities to learn from others, students and all of us become narrow-minded at best, and at worst, racist, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, transphobic, and homophobic. The last thing we should be doing is fomenting hate in our classroom. No teacher wants this. The aspiring teachers I work with want to be teachers that open up the world to their students. They want their students to ask questions and to challenge assumptions. In other words, they want them to read the word and the world, as Paulo Freire famously put it. They want them to be critical thinkers. We need to support our teachers as they face these challenges, either formally or informally, because they are dealing with a lot in these days and these difficult times, and even here in California, and there's a lot of self-censorship that occurs that I hope we have a chance to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an amazing panel. We have professional experience and we have personal experience here on this panel, on this particular subject, on what is, two great American traditions. One is banning books and the other is fighting banning books. They're both American traditions. Only about, 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of talk about how the book was moving into irrelevancy, right? We're gonna have ebooks and everything is gonna be online and all that stuff. It is interesting how books are still seen as a really central sort of vessel for ideas. And I think that's really a cornerstone of this debate also. I wanted to ask the panel to kind of begin with, and please forgive me if you've covered this in your opening statement or some of this, but the obvious idea of why banning books is a bad idea, and if you could step back and maybe look at it sort of globally about what are the costs when we ban materials from young people, or any people actually? What are the costs in terms of what we lose on a grand scale? So maybe we'll start with the librarian. Maybe Shannon has an idea about that.
Okay. Well, the first thing that popped into my head, I was making a note, was just the equity of access. So when you ban a book from this library, maybe it doesn't matter to the kid that has internet, but maybe it does matter to a kid like Zach was sharing his experience with, with someone who has less resources in their community. I think the effect of banning books, as Diane touched on in the panel, is it takes something from a personal belief that is maybe held by a small vocal minority into affecting our community at large. So someone objects to a book for their child, and if it's in result is banned from a library, it then affects all the children who might have had access to that, or all the people. So those were the first ideas that popped into my head. Does someone else wanna?
Ferris, what do you think?
Just to add to Shannon's comments, I think that, this idea that schools, the purpose of schools is to create active members of society who are change agents, right? And I think that that idea in itself may be considered controversial in some circles, but as a former social studies teacher, I think we want our students, our children, our youth to be able to understand their environment, understand it, and then find their voice to be able to recognize the injustices and change them. And I think that from my point of view, this effort to restrict is really an effort to try to slow down, to freeze, to undermine this change movement, right? The fact that our LGBTQ plus students and the resources that, as Zach mentioned, are helping them in their development, in their ability to be able to understand themselves, that those are being targeted, or that we're talking about how to limit understanding, the challenges of slavery or racism in society, and under the guise that, well, those pieces, I'll take care of that kind of instruction at home, because that's part of the tactic that's used. It's like, it's not your job as educators. You can't be trusted with that process. I don't know what my child is doing with that book in the library. I will take care of this, talk about issues of race or issues of sexuality, or that's my job. That idea that I'm going to take that, if it were true, if we were all in a place where we could talk about all the things that we're required to talk about in our schools, to help our students through the process of their development, I think that would make sense. But the reality is that we need to offer our students access to so much and give them every opportunity to be able to learn about themselves and about other people. And so I think that in my mind, that the damage that is being done is not only to individuals, which is terrible and painful, but it's also to democracy itself.
Anyone else have a viewpoint on?
I'll add something to it. I think upon that question, my initial thought kind of went to the structural, and especially the history of the structures for it, because I think there's, in your intro, you also kind of mentioned that there's a sense of control that's coming back to it, like controlling who has access, controlling what access information you even have, what information should be provided. I won't spend panel's time talking about the history of this necessarily, but I think there's quite a large extent of history globally of how the destruction, the banning, and limitation of knowledge in general has led to the ways of upholding a lot of power structures. And we still see that trickle effect happening today. So when we're having conversations around knowledge banning, and specifically book banning, but just knowledge banning in general, it is not necessarily just about a personal opinion or perception of it. It's ways in which we fuel and inflame a narrative around the structural mechanisms of oppression for this. So what is this upholding when we say, oh, LGBTQ plus representation, this is sexually explicit material. There is harmful rhetoric. We're afraid that there's an indoctrination tactic happening here. What this is doing is not saying, oh, we're trying to protect our youth. Instead, it's trying to, again, what is the normative assumption here? That white, cis, heterosexual experiences is the ideal. And so we're going to try to reduce anything that might offer an alternative experience to that. And we've seen this historically, and so I think when this argument continues to emerge, that it's the same way of those systems kind of coming through in the conversation. So I think both on the individual level, which is really critical that we're able to share with, we think about the structural implication it has.
Let me ask Cynthia down at the end there a little bit about the current challenge that we're facing here and how it might be different than, say, book banning waves that we've experienced in history in the 1950s with the Red Scare, and some of these other what is the character of the effort to restrict materials right now? We saw on the materials here that there was, what was the number, 11 people who were causing all this damage. I guess what people would like to understand is, what are we up against, I guess? I mean, is this just a small local minority, or is this a movement?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm the best person to talk about this, but I will anyway. just that I think the librarians are probably more knowledgeable about this, so I'll just say a few things. I mean, it's clear from the information that Diane showed us, for example, and when you think about all of the kind of pushback against ethnic studies and various forms of freedom to learn, I keep on coming back to that term, there are big national funded organizations that are behind this. And I don't know that that was the case in the past. I could be wrong about that, but as far as I know, that was not the case in the past. And so you have fewer people actually, you know, if you think about it in a democratic sense, there are fewer people actually making these challenges, but a structural power funded economic structure behind the few people who are making these challenges. So I think it's different in that way. It may also be different in terms of the real focus on limiting access to for kids of color, for young people of color, and for LGBTQ plus youth. The librarians.
Yeah, I think in Santa Cruz specifically, we've been very lucky with not having had to deal with many book challenges in the schools, as far as I know. Most individual parents who would bring a title to challenge a title, they're generally resolved by discussion with the teacher is always the first step, with principal, admin, or librarian if needed. And so I think, as you were saying, it's a very different animal when it's politically motivated and it's seen as a reaction to a cultural shift. And I don't know if this is the time to bring this up, but we were talking about, you know, banning a book, but are we really talking about trying, as Zach was saying, to, you know, eliminate people from our society? And at the point where you're taking a book out of a library, you're having someone not be represented, part of that political effort could go so far as to, you know, reduce funding for libraries. If libraries are unwilling to be censored, I know there are many libraries in the, not many, but there are some libraries in the country who have left the ALA because they don't agree with the current ALA president. And there becomes a political aspect to this that goes well beyond what's in a particular book and to what is, as Zach was saying, the systems that it reinforces.
Yeah, if I could add, you know, part of this conservative movement is to focus on the school system specifically, and that's been kind of one of the characteristics that we've been seeing. And it's not only library books, but you know, it's the core curriculum that teachers are teaching in the classroom as well. And so I do think that there's, you know, one of our questions in our preparation was about, is it theatrical, is it effective? And it's very theatrical, and it's a lightning rod issue. So if you're wanting to say that you're upset about the raising of the rainbow flag, and you're frustrated that we're celebrating Pride Month and LGBTQ History Month and so on, this focus on books is one that has galvanized a growing population of people. And so it looks like people going to school board meetings and complaining about specific books and reading parts of those books and showing them. That's how that has manifested in a lot of places. We've seen a little bit of that with the critical race theory concerns, and we've seen some folks who have been, you know, coming to our school boards. Definitely nothing like we've seen in other areas, but even to the south in Atascadero in Monterey County, we've seen in San Luis Obispo, definitely where at every board meeting you're seeing more books being brought forward, and then specific complaints, pictures of teachers' classrooms with folks complaining. We see some of that on social media. We don't see it so much in our school boards yet, but I do believe that as more pockets of maybe progressive approaches to this are identified by these movements, I think we're going to be focused upon more. And Moms for Liberty had a get-together, as you've probably heard, a few weeks ago. And there was specific tactics that were discussed at that meeting. There was about 50 people in Watsonville talking about how we need to, this was their words, we need to, tap into the concerns of the Latino community to get them riled up and to influence school policy, and that includes book banning.
Something that you guys said in your introductory remarks really kind of struck me, and I think it might have struck the audience also. Farris having grown up in Iraq, Zach having grown up in rural Virginia, you have a certain experience with a world in which materials aren't infinite. Most of us living in the contemporary world today, it feels like anyway, that materials are infinite. I mean, books are everywhere, online, internet, all that stuff. I was wondering if each of you could maybe comment a little more, maybe tell some stories or anecdotes about living in a world in which materials are kind of hard to come by.
Oh my gosh, plenty of stories I could share. I think specifically like related to this conversation, I found that, so I got access to internet in 8th grade. That's when I moved. We moved primarily because of my school experiences. My school, especially in the town that I had mentioned with 270 people, there was no public transportation in that school, in that area. So there's 2 buses that would take care of all the youth. And so there was a really high amount of smuggling that would happen on those buses. The school itself was just a really insecure and unsafe area. Our local library consisted of our academic yearbooks and our local newspapers. But outside of that, we didn't really have, I don't recall at any point in my K through 5th experience reading like anything, books of meaning, right? Nothing ever I saw representation or had idea outside of an identity. Most of them were like a book about cats or something similar to that. And so that was like very much my developmental experience growing up. And then I moved and suddenly I got access to internet. And I think what I experienced, as well as some of the youth that I have talked to and experienced, is that internet is a really powerful place. It's a really amazing place. It's a wealth of resources. It's also an incredibly overwhelming space that can have misinformation and harmful content. And I think when we talk about, what I really think about from my own personal experiences when we talk about banned books and this restriction on access to knowledge, it forces and it emboldens that same misinformation, harmful language to now what takes its place. And so I really felt that impact. I think my initial experiences, to like spare like I think a lot of graphics, my initial introduction into like LGBTQ identities was a very negative one. A lot of the stuff that I was seeing online was really homophobic, specifically about how to condition yourself to no longer be queer. And so I engaged in those tactics for longer than I would have cared for. And realizing that like that tactic was this emboldenment of misinformation and knowledge by rejecting healthy identity expression, by not having a way for me to understand and negotiate, by not being given that information, it led to me to really harmful outcomes in my development. And thankfully, I'm proud to be able to be up here as a healthy, proud, thriving adult. And that was not my experience. My area really emboldened that. I was fired from my job when I came out as queer. My public area published a newspaper article about me. It was a really deep reaction from the community, just for me trying to be like, hey, I would like to be myself, if that's okay. So I think like when we talk about the implications this has, like that was my experience growing up. And this is not just a one-off experience from someone from a small town, but these are the stories and experiences of people right now, their youth that are happening. And the time that we've had this panel, we've lost the lives of some of our queer people because they don't feel like they're represented or have a space to be able to be themselves. So.
I think that was brilliant, Zach. When I think about the feeling of, especially when Zach talks about the overwhelming kind of information that's out there, in many ways, folks who do have access to the internet have access to a lot, and some of it not very good. So the idea of having a librarian who can actually be your guide, a trusted authority, your teacher, somebody who can tell you this is it could help you and it's appropriate and it's at your level, and having that, I think, is so important. The opposite, the flip side of that, is that it is something that is wrong and it's shameful, and if that represents me, then what I am is wrong and shameful. And so I think that this idea that even if we have access to that information, if I have to do it in the shadows, well, you're going to put part of who I am in the shadows, and that may be the purpose of people who are wanting to do that. But it's I'm pretty confident everybody in the room would stand against that.
No.
Let's turn to Scarlett. I am interested in the life of a young person today in terms of, now, I don't want to assume anything, but I imagine that you have internet and you have as much of the universe coming into your personal world as the rest of us. How do you navigate that as a young person and find the materials in the floodgates? Do you have to lean on teachers more so than perhaps those of us who grew up before the internet do? I mean, how do you, what's it like?
I know that it took me a long time to just figure out how to navigate through it, and I didn't really ask for help because I just didn't know that I could, I guess. I mean, I had to read some not very accepting stuff on the internet. I remember just finding very harmful things, like Zach said, but kind of in a different way, where I found stuff that made me hate myself, but mainly think that I was better than other people because I wasn't like that. And it took me a long time to accept myself for who I am, what I like to do. And I know that my generation is online a lot, like a lot. Yeah, and it's kind of hard, I guess, because the internet is so big, so wide, so it has everything. I mean, you can find practically anything on the internet. And being a kid, finding that, being on sites like YouTube and stuff very young was confusing, because so many differing opinions. And even now, the internet is getting bigger, getting wider, but it's also getting smaller with online censorship, I guess, with things like just trying to erase stuff online, erase people. I'm not on Twitter, or X, I guess, but I did read that once Elon Musk got control, I guess, of it, the use of slurs, and specifically the N-word, went up so incredibly much. And I also see it around me. As a student, I see kids my age, kids younger, using slurs, using horrible language, insulting me, insulting my friends, insulting people. Because the internet, they don't know. They don't know that it's harmful. They don't know that it's wrong. Because they don't know any better. There's nothing to say, don't do that. Don't say that. Because the internet does that. The internet just, it's amazing. It helps me find my identity, but also hurts people with misinformation that's so widespread. And to be on the internet, you have to go through that. You have to wade through it. You have to find yourself. And I think it's important that we have librarians like Miss Tracy who help us, who come into classes to teach us how to identify proper sources, identify correct things that aren't misinformation, and classes like Media Lit at my school that once again help us wade through this sea of everything. And the idea of people trying to do that more in person, do that to books, which was something that I could always depend on. It's just, I don't know any way to put it, but it feels wrong. It feels wrong.
Good.
Yeah, as a teenager, it hurts.
Yeah.
I want to turn to you and ask about how book banning works. Maybe ask Shannon and Cynthia a little bit about this, about how it would seem to me that book banning is an issue with libraries, it's an issue with schools, and I guess it's an issue with bookstores as well. Those are kind of the three fronts that they. Let me get you to react to this idea, which I've heard before, that book banning in today's world is essentially doomed because of the access to materials that we have. If you say you can't read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, somebody in your community is going, oh yeah, I'm gonna buy 30 copies and pass them around. That this is a quixotic, doomed effort to try to hold something up. How do you?
That's totally inaccurate.
How do you respond to that?
Oh, okay. That wouldn't be the case in schools, right? Like, yes, kids might get access to The Bluest Eye, say, in the school, but they wouldn't be able to discuss it. They wouldn't be able to see themselves in the curriculum again. While all these other books that are by white authors and about white characters, white middle-class characters, that also include sexuality, will be discussed and included. So I think, that, so in school, and plus teachers are censoring themselves. Sometimes it's an actual ban, right? You must not talk about race. My colleague Laura Bartlett is doing research all over the country related to teacher work and related to this issue. And she talks about a teacher, I think it was a social studies teacher, who taught the book by Ibram Kendi, stamped from the beginning as an approved history course text for 5 years, and then suddenly was never allowed to teach it. Like, you can't teach this anymore. So teachers are feeling like they're not allowed to tell the truth about history. And in some cases, they might not be told exactly that, you may not do this, but it's they're worried about parent responses, they're worried about all kinds of things, especially if they are not tenured teachers yet. And so they self-censor. And one of my PhD students was doing a study of award-winning history teachers. Charlie Brooks is her name. And she's written about how teachers in states where there's not complete banning, but there's, the craze about CRT, critical race theory, and all of that. And the teachers are trying to strategically find ways to still be able to tell the truth and to work with kids around these historical truths and do it, without using that term or without using the term race sometimes. I was working on a partnership research project with a school district and was, and the school district was great and really wanted to do the research, but they were worried about the word critical in the letter that I wrote, about the partnership. So I needed to take the word critical out of the letter. Again, no fault of the school district. So, there's all kinds of self-censorship that's happening. And then I want to say that, maybe this relates to your experience, Zach, that even before all of this, or maybe there was no before all of this, there are also teachers who feel like they need to really teach the ideologies of what's normal, right? The ideology of what's normal. So they self-censor in terms of what they think it means to keep children innocent, right? And that's a problem for all kinds of reasons. Or they self-censor in terms of, urban topics that might be too violent, or, for example, the Moms for Liberty wanted, Ruby Bridge, the story of Ruby Bridge, I'm getting lots of nods, Louisiana, first child, African-American child to integrate Louisiana school. She wrote a book called Ruby Bridge, My Story, and there's a sentence in there about the white mob yelling at her. She went into the school, and Moms for Liberty didn't like that. It's too harsh for kids, they said. It's too harsh for kids. And there was no redemption at the end of the story. I mean, talking about historical truth, right? I'll stop there, you hear me. There's all kinds of censorship that we're talking about, tacit, self-censorship, and actual, banned books.
So, listening to what Scarlett was saying and then hearing what you're saying, Cynthia, I'd like to take just a second and talk about what is the opportunity we have when we don't ban books. And so I'd just like to share a couple quick anecdotes of my experience as a school librarian, luckily in a school where I haven't had to self-censor yet or limit what I can provide to our students. And so one of my first experiences, when I had just taken over as the full-time librarian, I had a young queer student who had a very troubled family life and had found some refuge in Santa Cruz and had started coming to Harbor High, and was one of my favorite library students. And he came up to me one day and he said, "Miss Tracy, why don't you have any gay romance in this library?" And I had just read Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, which is just an amazing gay romance novel. So I was able to share that book with him, and it was just such a fulfilling and wonderful experience. And so when we talk about representation, we have touched on that is something that you get when you don't ban books. And also, Scarlett, you reminded me of just what amazing critical thinkers you and your cohort of students are. My Project Lit Book Club, our Project Lit Book Club, last year did a project for mental health awareness focused on around National Eating Disorders Awareness Week. And the students brought it to me. One of the students had a personal experience with it, and they were very passionate about sharing it with the school. And so we pulled all of the both fiction and nonfiction books we could find in the Harbor High Library about eating disorders, and Scarlett and the rest of the book club went through them. They all took a couple home to read, and we looked for things that used to be okay, but now glamorized eating disorders or had pictures that were considered unhelpful. And we went through and culled the collection of everything that wasn't great, and they went through book lists, and we bought a whole bunch of new books and created trigger warning little stickers that we put on those books, because even once they've been vetted, they can still be triggering. So I think part of your amazing critical reading, critical thinking skills come from your experience having been exposed to such a breadth of information and ideas. And so in addition to the political aspects of what we lose with banning books, I think we also could be losing some of that critical thinking and skills and strategies in our students.
And perhaps losing the library as an access point for young people to come find themselves, right? I mean, the library serves a very specific role in that talk.
You asked about what does it look like to ban, what does that banning books process look like, or censorship look like? Usually it starts with a parent who formally complains to the school district that a book is inappropriate for students.
And those complaints would get to you eventually, right?
Well, now that's interesting you bring that up. There's a new law that just passed called AB 1078, which involves the county superintendent. I'll get to that in a moment. But every school district would be required to investigate that some material is inappropriate and they would have to have a process to review to make sure that it is aligned to the curriculum, the requirements, the local policies, the law. one of the ways that folks have been using the system is to overwhelm the system, is to flood the complaints with so many books that you end up, and so in some places, people have a policy where if it's under review, we need to take it aside and hold on to it while we do the review. Well, guess what? Nobody has access to that book anymore. And it's a victory for books, and now you have 100 of them. And we have to go through this process where we have people with expertise who are looking at it, looking at the standards and saying it's actually okay, let's put it back on there. And so that's been some of the tactics that are being used. The governor just recently signed a piece of legislation called AB 1078, which has really two components to it. One is to make it more difficult to utilize this process to ban books. And on the other side, it requires school districts to make available books that are representative of our LGBTQ plus community, of our people of color, and other, basically any group that they need to be represented in our books. And there is a process that does involve the county superintendent. If there is the reverse complaint, which is any member in the community can file a complaint against a school district or a school in saying that they are banning books. That complaint would come to the county superintendent, me, and we would have to investigate to verify if book banning is taking place in that school. So it's the reverse process, a reverse complaint process. It almost feels like dueling complaints, right? There's a complaint against and a complaint against banning, a complaint against the books to ban. But that is something that we're seeing. It's an assertive step that the law is now in place to really protect schools to be able to withstand these challenges and be able to make sure that these books remain in circulation.
That makes a lot of sense. And that leads me to another question, and maybe you can all comment on this, and that's the fact that we're not in Texas, we're not in Florida, we're not in Arkansas, we're in California, we're in Santa Cruz. You have mentioned earlier that you almost never or rarely have these kinds of challenges here. We now have 1078, that kind of is another safeguard. How do we make sense of the book banning in other places if it's not penetrating here? Is it just a sense of being vigilant? Is it, do you think, why should we be concerned about what happens in Texas and Arkansas? I guess would be my question.
I have a thought on that. I think that's really important that when we are thinking about what are the implications for this. There's a Jafari S. Allen is a fantastic scholar with an amazing book, and questions like what is the politics of your question? What is the politics for this idea? And so when we are talking about Texas and Florida, these very high turnover for policy and legislative that is specifically targeting communities, both gender and sexual diverse communities and communities of color. We're not talking about just like a system of oppression. We're not talking about restriction of rights. We're talking about the lives of these individuals. We know in these states that there's a much higher turnover of suicide, as well as an increased rate of violence being enacted, specifically hate crimes being enacted and enforced there. And then these policies also embolden this ability to not have repercussions having this. So it's happening more frequently, as well as with less persecution happening after the fact of this occurring. And so I think it's important when we're talking about why care, or not why care, but how can we support and think about it when it's not necessarily in our communities. We have a beautiful community that's able to stand tall in this. The LGBTQIA task force working under the County of Education has a top list of 40 books that have been screened by our educators, that have been given age ranges of appropriateness for them. So we know we have access to resources and information that are very clear and able to be resourced from any of our local community members. That is not a resource that exists within Texas and Florida, and if it is not only scrutinized, but it has actual persecutions to the educators who are producing them, to the students and the youth there. We know plenty of research, especially Stephen Russell has a lot of research on suicidality around LGBTQ plus youth. When you don't have this research and information, you are constantly reinforced and seeing these messages because youth, they're not naive to what's happening. whether it be social media or hearing the conversations in the hallways, seeing it in their local communities. They're aware of what's happening, and they're not only entitled to the experience and emotional reactions to this, but it directly impacts them. So when we think about what should we do, why is it important that we think about these other areas, is because like what one community member's experiencing impacts all of us. It gives more flame to the local, to the state, and then to the national legislation to be able to uphold these policies. So I think one thing we do is something that I've learned a lot about is teachers unions, especially in Florida right now, having teachers physically going to Florida to march and to protest, constantly writing letters to these officials, talking about it, providing narratives, not only just of what's happening in their classroom and the benefit this has, but to continuously reinforce that there are alternative experiences that are happening here, and these alternative experiences are saving lives. These alternative experiences are fostering a sense of community, of well-being, and healthy identity, and this has long-term implications for how we as a society want to be able to grow and develop. So that's my thought.
Anyone else want to comment on?
I just want to add that, and thank you for that. That was beautiful. I just want to add that even though we're in a progressive city, right, there still is self-censorship, and the self-censorship has to do with fear of larger community response. And so, I mean, as just an example, my kids didn't grow up here, but in Iowa, and from 1987 to 2002, while they were growing up, I spent a lot of time saying, why are all the books that they read in English class heteronormative? Why is that, right? I didn't make a formal challenge, but I should have made a formal challenge. And you know, it's like a young person asking, where's the gay romance, right? We still, you know, we take a lot of pride in not being like Texas and Florida, but I do think that there is much for us to work on here as well. And the effects of Texas and Florida, and not just Texas, and Oklahoma, and all the places that have PragerU now, which, you know, they're against us, they're against the left indoctrinating, but they admit that what they're doing is indoctrinating. And make millions of dollars doing it. We might not have that, but all of that affects us, and it all affects the teachers. And teachers are willing to fight, but they also have their jobs to consider, their communities that they're responsible to, and all kinds of things that foment this kind of fear.
If I could add, I think we need to listen to Scarlett. And the reason I say that is that, you know, I think we have now in California some more laws that are protecting our community. I think that, but where we stand in strength is when we are able to stand with our students. And when our students tell us, this is what I need for myself, it makes it easier to tell a parent who is saying that they are working on behalf of students. It makes it easier for us to say, our job is to serve our students. We are listening to our students. They want privacy. They want to be able to see books that represent them in their libraries and in the books that they're reading in school, in the conversations they're having with each other. And that's where we're able to stand in strength. And so I think we need to, as much as possible, hear the voices of our students. Let them be the ones that tell us which books belong. And they, when we have listened, they have told us that they want a beautiful rainbow of representation in our books, and they want a real understanding of the historical oppression that exists.
The main thing that I always have thought of is this kind of motto that a lot of people have: protect the children, save the children. And that saying has been used across history. I mean, you saw it, like, I've only been alive for 17 years. I don't have much experience. But what I do have experience with is people my age. You say protect the kids. You're not. I mean, you're harming us when you don't teach kids how to be kind and accepting, and teach kids about identities and stuff. you are opening this doorway for kids to hurt other kids. I hear it in my own school, I hear it in my classrooms, people being ignorant. I have been called slurs, I have been called derogatory names since I was a child. And that does something to you, and if it wasn't for books, and if it wasn't for supportive people around me, I don't know what I would have done. And protect the children isn't real. You want to protect the children, teach the children, inform the children, help children learn, help people find themselves. And books have always done that. Books that a lot of people don't like. People trying to ban books don't like. Books like The Hate You Give, or like Miss Tracy said, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe was a book that changed my life. I read it when I was 14 or 15, and I had long since accepted who I was, but even reading that was like, wow, I see this. I see aspects of myself in these characters, but I also see aspects of my classmates in them. And just the fact that I have grown up with these kids, I know these kids, and their ignorance it's alarming, the fact that they don't have to be ignorant if we could teach children. And this is in Santa Cruz. I can't even imagine in other places like Zach and stuff, if this is happening in our amazing place where I feel accepted and I feel loved and I feel okay, I can't even imagine it, because this feels dystopian. The idea of taking away knowledge, because where does it end? Where does it end? Are you starting with books? Are you going to go to the internet? Are you going to go to our voices, the people? Where does it end? And it doesn't matter where you are. If we don't teach children, we hurt them. If we don't inform children, we hurt them. You aren't protecting them. You're just setting up disaster, setting up something that shouldn't happen. It is 2023. We are so far in the future. I mean, people in the 1950s, 1960s, there are predictions from then about what we would look like now, about what society would be. Flying cars, these amazing hoverboards and stuff. But what do we have? We have going back to this horrifying age that I'm so glad I wasn't a part of. But in 2023, and we are seeing this again and again. We saw this in the 70s with the Protect Our Children from Gay Men. We are seeing it now with Protect the Children from Trans People. We have less abortion rights. We have police brutality everywhere. And this can be combated, but people are actively trying to put us back in the dark ages. That's not okay. All in all, it's not okay.
That's wonderful to hear you underline how a certain book can change your life. That really gives all of us a lot of hope that is still happening to young people, and that's a really wonderful thing. I wanted to go a little bit about a story that you had shared with us, and real quickly about this library in southeastern Washington State that is up for a ballot, where they have put it on the ballot to close the library. And so, yeah, we're talking about banning books, but banning libraries might be the next logical choice here. And I think we all kind of have a deep, abiding love for what libraries are and what they represent, right? And I mean, certainly in this community, the new libraries here and the one that's going to be opening, it's all great. I want to end just by how we can get involved and how we can push back and how we can contribute. Anybody have any ideas on that?
I do. Some of this is borrowed from things I've been listening to. The ALA president, the PEN America, woman from PEN America spoke recently. Advocate at your school boards. Ferris probably has some ideas about this too. But advocate at the school board level, encourage your friends, or consider running yourself. You know, if not you, then who? And support funding for libraries. Like you were saying, there's a vote up, and there's a lot of voting with your dollars, even if maybe a library isn't completely shuttered, it may be defunded in such a way that it restricts its ability to provide information. And then read the books that are challenged, and educate yourself about how you, or think about it yourself. How do you feel about that book, and how do you feel like that book fits our community's values? So when you see something being challenged, you can speak to it from a personal way.
Well, thank you all.
Actually,
I'd like to mention that we do have this resource guide here, and it has a lot of information about how you can get involved. There are a number of toolkits, and in fact, tomorrow is, we are celebrating Banned Books Week, and tomorrow is Freedom to Read Day, and we are encouraging everyone to do at least one action, whether that is something small like just reading a banned book, or donating to an organization like Every Library, which supports they can actually do fundraising for libraries and in political campaigns that support libraries, and they do it, and they have just in fact saved a library from shutting down. There are a couple of libraries recently in the scary places that have, as well as said, when they withstood the challenges to the books, their city councils and or community organizations voted to defund the library. So yeah, it's really serious. So I definitely urge you all to get involved and do one thing tomorrow, and then I think, can we open it up for questions? All right, so, yeah, questions?
I'm just curious how many books have been challenged at the Santa Cruz Library?
Here in our library system, a formal challenge, I don't think we've had one in years. Usually challenges are resolved with a conversation, and I have had those conversations, a few times. It might occasionally get to the library director. Usually that's enough to resolve the issue with that individual.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
The mic? Oh, that's okay. I'll just speak loud. My first is not a question, but you may be aware of the fact that there are libraries that are starting to be created in the United States, and I can't tell you in which states in particular, that are composed strictly of banned books. One is in Brooklyn that I read in New York Times recently. So I like that trend. Let's just create more libraries. They don't have to be formal brick and mortar. Come, it can be in a mall. Hey, all of these books are available. They're all banned. Come, And so the other thing I wanted to ask, when you were talking about the tsunami of reviews that are necessary to determine whether the books that are considered bannable are suddenly removed from the library shelves, so the book is considered guilty until proven innocent. That's an interesting thought process. Why can't there be book replacements still available to use while the books are being reviewed?
That's a great point, and that process was what's happening in Florida and other places where the numbers that we saw earlier, where they're doing massive numbers of challenges. We haven't seen that here. Every school district has a policy of how they go about looking at challenged, and so we need to look at those policies to see exactly, because we haven't tested them very much yet. I think it's something that we need to be looking at very carefully, because we should anticipate that each of our districts could very well be getting to multiple challenges soon, what that process looks like. So part of that policy could be that the book remains in circulation until the review is done, for example. I do think too that with some of the protections that we have in place, if a district were to inappropriately remove a book from circulation, there would be consequences. That could be fines or other kinds of consequences for doing that. So that it's really, in California, these laws are really meant to protect protect school districts and keep those books in circulation.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, as you asked, what people can do, and self-serving comment, you can get involved with the Friends of the Library. I mean, we are an organization that exists specifically to support the library and the library system. I can tell you that in the last few months, I have on at least a couple of occasions received either emails or letters from people asking specifically, I would like to make this gift, I'd like to have it for LGBTQ+ materials, I'd like it specifically for the children's collection, can you do that? The answer is hell yes. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to tell us this money is for this purpose, I get on the phone, I call Sarah Harbison, I say, hey, I got $1,000 here. It's burning a hole in our collective pocket and it's targeted at this. And Sarah goes out and does that, and we are right now running a campaign where we are asking for donations to the collection, specifically for DEI type material for the collection, and give $50, you get a really sweet looking t-shirt, the envy of your neighborhood, and looks just like the one this lovely lady behind me happens to be wearing, actually. And those, we've already gone over, I think, $2,500 that will go to, again, these purposes. So, if you want books on, I don't know, Lithuanian history or whatever, we don't care. We can target those gifts for you. So,
I'd like. Talk about our bookstore.
Yes, both of us are. Added on to that is, some of you may know that the Friends of the Capitola Library have a bookstore at the mall. And we've actually become an anchor store at the mall. Lots of people are coming in because we sell books, paperback books for $1, hardcover books for $2. We have DVDs and CDs, and it's a very popular store. We have lots of people coming in buying used books. They leave with bagfuls of books and maybe they've only paid $10 for, like 20 books.
Well, and also this week, because it's
Yes.
Ban Books Week, we have at the desk, we have the list of 100 books that are banned. And so we've highlighted the ones that are in our bookstore. And if they take the book, it's free.
It's like a little scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
And I do have to say that it's run entirely by volunteers, so all the funds go back to the library.
And it's a great place to donate books.
Yes.
It is. Have a couple more questions?
I was wondering if you guys as teachers and as researchers and as students could talk a little bit about something that does really affect our community, which is inequitable access to books and internet. Another example is in California in general, only wealthy school districts are able to have librarians. And that's true in our county as well. So, and we saw in Pajaro with the flooding, the Pajaro Middle School lost its entire library collection. So just if you have any thoughts about the way people in our community lose access to books and information because of that inequitable access.
I could start and then, you know, I think though that the way the school system works, I think that, for example, with COVID there, we had identified about 20% of our community that didn't have access to internet when we first transitioned. It's up to about, that 20% is down to about 2%. So the great majority of our community across the county have access. Now, it's not broadband access, and that's one of the big differences. It's the districts invested heavily in hotspots, which are not broadband. But in terms of access to their instructional experience, there is the few people that don't have access generally is because the hotspots don't work. So they live in areas where hotspots don't work. When it comes to the way the funding formula works for schools, the schools, Pajaro Valley Unified School District received $120 million extra that no other school districts received during the pandemic. So the funding formula is designed to support school districts that have larger communities of students who are language learners, students from low-income families, and students in foster care. And so I think that but the reality is that the equity gap exists when we look at our outcomes. And so so resources is not the only challenge that we face. And access to books, I think, I do think that, for example, Santa Cruz City Schools is significantly less resourced than Pajaro Valley Unified School District in terms of the resources. But they've made the choice to place teacher librarians there, whereas Pajaro Valley Unified School District has made the choice to put library and media tech. That was a decision based on priorities. And so as a parent, I'm a PVSD parent. As a parent, I could be advocating for it because I think it's amazing that we have librarian teachers there, because that is amazing that, especially in the context of this whole conversation, having somebody with that level of expertise to be able to help guide, facilitate, and lead conversations about instruction and about acquisition of resources. It really is about prioritization.
Yes, I just want to start off by kind of just giving a little story about having books accessible. The pandemic happened. I'm a preschool teacher just down the street, and I just felt such a need to be able to still reach out to my kids, even though I couldn't go see them, that my husband and I decided to build a free library, you know, a little book library, and put it in front of my house. And somebody brought some kids' books, and they're gone before you can even, you know, sneeze, they're gone. And so I put out on, you know, Facebook, I need more books. And a teacher who had retired, works for a company that, I mean, not a company, donation place. So she brought tons of books. They're never, like, they never stay. And I just decided that I'm not going to go in and look at the books and say what can stay and what can't. That doesn't mean that I agree with everything that's put in my book library, but I'm not going to take it out just because that somebody else felt that they needed to put it there, and that's accessible there. But I don't feel today that there's anyone on this panel representing me in how I feel in this community. And I've heard several comments from people on the panel that are hurtful for me to hear. I want to say that one of them was Wallace Bain. You said that it's an American tradition to ban books and fight banning. Well, I only see one side here on this panel today. So I would like you to maybe think about having conversations with people who have concerns about literature that's being presented, especially to the very young. That's who my, you know, life is the little ones. And because not having somebody there to have the conversation restricts it only to one side. And then I also said no to a statement you said because you made an assumption for me, and that was not okay. So I said no, and I'm sorry that I spoke up out of turn, but I wanted you to know that you did not speak for me. And So that's what I would like to know.
So
Why
what
was
is
there
it
not
that
someone
you
else on this
felt
panel?
was not represented here? You think there should be a,
There
Well,
are,
books,
I'm
help
a
me
Christian, and I know that I self-censor when I'm in the classroom all the time, so I know how it feels. I know that you'd probably fire me if I spoke about it. But I'm not there to, proselytize. I'm there to love. I'm there to give the information to the kids. I'm there to give truth to the kids. I don't feel everything that is knowledge is really beneficial. I don't think everything that's knowable is truth. So I think having conversations about how things are presented, like how you put on your book, this may, what's it you said?
Trigger warning.
Trigger warning. That would have been excellent for a book that I picked up in the children's section from Maurice Sendak. Oh, I just love his books. But I opened the book and I saw this villainous character stealing a baby. And it was right there where the 3-year-old treated. I was like, whoa, it would have helped me. But I know that you say you can't put it in another section. That's not okay. Why? So those are the conversations I wanted to have, but they're not available. So I just wanted to know why that wasn't presented.
I appreciate that, thank you. And you know, there is a real variety of points of view and challenges, and many challenges come from a completely different place. You know, as times change, we look back on some of the materials that, you know, were, you know, certain language was used in, you know, in former times that is not appropriate
But then
today.
that's banning.
And it is,
So that's not okay.
that's right.
That's right.
And
Exactly.
you see, there's a balance. So as a librarian, as particularly in a public library, you know, okay, this, you know, we still have it, it's still on the shelf. Maybe we don't buy a new copy unless somebody asks for it when it, you know, so you don't ban the material, but you can lead people to a similar resource with similar information that has less offensive terms, that is more modern, you know, and you know, if you came to me for reading recommendations, then I would be leading you to the types of materials that you would like to read. And when it comes to, you know, there is age appropriateness, and I do think that we addressed that. It was quick, but you know, yes, there is age appropriateness for certain materials, and that's why we have cataloging and classification, and they go into, you know, different areas of the library. And not to say that you can't, a person of any age couldn't go to another area in the library and get a book from there. That's up to them, that's up to their family. We are here to make it accessible.
So you didn't answer my question though, about the panel. That was my question. Why wasn't the panel balanced?
Can I respond to your question?
Yeah.
I think context is always really important for this. So I just want to first appreciate you providing your perspective and being able to talk about it. I do think that was something I want to challenge, especially on like the knowledge is for everyone. Like we as a growing collective, I think what is like the values behind each person on the panel. I think the value behind this is to like provide information. And the information really is that like the people that we're talking about are those who have been systemically vulnerable, who've been marginalized. The conversation is not around trying to restrict the access to information. It's not around trying to dictate what you can and can't say from it. It's trying to say like, what have we heard from our youth? What have we know scientifically and based on the research and literature over decades of research? What is it saying to us? And let's try to make the best practice that we can. So I think that although there's always going to be a variety of perspectives, the perspectives that from my experience on this panel are ones that are trying to be informed by what do we know now, what we've listened to the communities, we were trying to listen to this. We're also recognizing the harm, we're seeing the statistics of what harm is caused by this, so what practices can we put in place to create protection? So although I understand that you your experiences don't get represented on this panel, and I can acknowledge that. I want to hold that as like, I genuinely appreciate you sharing that.
Because I feel that I'm trying to protect and keep harm from happening to other people on the other side. So, you know, it's all about how to present things. Exactly.
However, Sharon? Scarlett said very clearly, you don't protect kids by keeping information from them and by restricting what they're able to see and learn.
Amen.
You protect children by allowing them to be themselves.
So you let them go run in the street.
No,
Such a
that's,
great
no,
idea.
that's not what I'm saying, and that's
See,
not,
that's what you're
see,
saying.
that's what you said, that's what happened in your head. I'm saying,
Yeah.
you don't protect them by restricting who they are. You find out who they wanna be and allow them to do that. That's what they're saying, that's all they're saying. They're not saying anything else. So your objection doesn't seem to fit with what they said, that's all.
Well, in
You
my
protect your
observations
kids
with the
and we'll
3-year-olds
protect
that I
ours,
work
and I think we're
with, they
gonna
wanna
draw
be a
this to a
dragon for the
close.
day.
Yes,
They
thank you.
want-
Thank you so much.
We're gonna have to do some editing on this video.